Okay, live stream Tuesday is live. Welcome, everyone. This week, I'm going to talk about MicroStrategy and Bitcoin. Why talk about it? Well, in hindsight, I wish I knew everything that I knew today about Bitcoin when I first put Bitcoin in. But increasingly, the big difference I'll say between what I'm going to say in this live stream and anything I've said before is my confidence level based on the fact that we just have had so much more time, so much more history to kind of like look at Bitcoin. The thing when like I put Bitcoin into the portfolio in 2020, that's when I first put Bitcoin into the portfolio at Banyan Hill. It was really a pretty generalized sort of like just a sort of like, hey, this thing's down 80%, digital money. There's pretty simple assumptions. But since then, I've spent even more time researching Bitcoin. And obviously, we've seen the emergence of like these super Bitcoin buyers like MicroStrategy that clearly have dug into Bitcoin, dug into the history of money, and are making enormous, like gigantic sized bets, right? If you could go back to another time, the only thing that I can really compare it to is sort of like Warren Buffett buying, like there are some big stories like Warren Buffett buying into Coca-Cola in the 1980s. And, it's like every day in the market, like he's just buying and buying and buying. Why? Well, because he's understood something about Coca-Cola, the company, understood something about the market, understood something about Coca-Cola, the stock. And he's like, yeah, 10, 15% moves, 20% moves. It doesn't matter. What I understand is so important. What I understand is so meaningful. What I understand is so different than what everybody else is focused on. And my my price targets, my return targets are so high, so great that these small up and down movements, nobody cares. He doesn't care. And Coca-Cola even today is like, one of the largest holdings that Warren Buffett has. And when I think about MicroStrategy, this is something similar. No one else is doing what Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy is doing, which is essentially just buying up as much Bitcoin. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the strategy because I'll admit, when I even put MicroStrategy into the then True Momentum portfolio, now it's the gold tier at ATG Digital. It was just like, hey, Bitcoin's going up. It's clearly scarce. The scarcity drives value, and clearly there's demand, both from a speculative side and as a store of value. But today in 2024, even the MicroStrategy Michael Saylor strategy has evolved some more. There's like this very, very deliberate, like thing that Michael Saylor has worked out to take money, cash money from the bond market, and where if he's right, and I believe he's going to be right, he never has to pay it back. It'll just get converted into MicroStrategy stock, which keeps just getting rocketing higher and higher because of Bitcoin price. All right, I've gotten far ahead, but let me do all the legal disclosure stuff before I lay out number one, Bitcoin, number two, MicroStrategy, and why also I believe like right now, like we just had a 4K candle. What's a 4K candle? Well, essentially like a big jump. Bitcoin just went from 57,000 to 61,000. And happened essentially in about an hour. I looked this morning, it was at 57. I looked right before getting on, it was nearly 61. All right, but let me get to all of this, which is that All ATG. Oh, that's actually one. Yeah, this is the one I start with usually. This live stream and the content from ATG Digital is not investment or financial advice. It's presented to you as opinion, information, engagement, and entertainment. All ATG Digital may contain errors. Digital content may contain errors, oversights, and mistakes. Understand that investment operations, which mean what? Buying or selling a stock, crypto, options, have significant risk and can lead to the loss of your principal being your money. Next, the owners, employees, contractors, own, trade, and transact in the securities that are mentioned in this video, and all content from ATG Digital. We do not take money from companies or crypto sponsors or promoters to recommend their stocks or crypto tokens. For better and for worse, all of our uh, investment information, model portfolio trades, etc., are based on our own independent research, understanding, experience, and that's one of the benefits, I suppose, of being with us, which is like we're independent. This is all of the free stuff we put out. The Substack is the most regular thing. YouTube is the second most regular thing. The Ballman Speculating podcast is definitely intermittent. Social media, quite active on X, inactive on Instagram, quite active, especially when the markets are moving. And Dean gets excited. He's on Facebook, engaging and entertaining all of you. And if you are interested in a paid subscription, which begins for our silver tier at $9.99 per month, atgdigital.media is where to go. Okay. I started this live stream out by talking about like, hey, in hindsight, in 2020, I didn't know as much as I now know about Bitcoin. I know way more now. I've spent far more time studying the sort of like structure, the format, the pattern. And one thing is very clear that, I don't know, it's certainly in like 5 to 10 years, people are going to look back at 2024. And certainly, I mean, when we put Bitcoin, I mean, people are going to be like, whoa, Bitcoin was way, way cheap. Like right now, everyone's like, Paul, Bitcoin hasn't gone anywhere for 6 months. People have all these complaints. But it's very clear that Bitcoin is a very different kind of investment asset, whatever you want to call it, than anything else that we've ever seen. And it is going to follow some form of a mathematical pattern. And that mathematical pattern is going to, as I told our team, both going to create fortunes and destroy them. Because it is going to rise and rocket up and going to make people, crazy, and they'll buy in at the highs, and then it's guaranteed to crash as well. And this is the pattern, and the pattern is mathematical. You don't know the exact precise form that it's going to take, but it does form this very, very clear sort of like overall structure where it rockets up and then it crashes on a regular basis. And it's driven by the fact that it is finite at 21 million coins. The supply halves every 210,000 blocks. And then there's the third part, which is the human desire for it, which is completely and 100% connected to price. We are all, as humans, we don't want to buy it when things are low. We want to buy when things are high and rising. We want to buy when it's in demand. We want to buy when we see things going up. We crave it once we see somebody else has gotten rich by it. But at low prices, we really like, Paul, I'll wait. You've been saying this a long time. You've been talking about this Bitcoin, it's all fine. But I'll tell you, at 120K, at 200K, at 300K, you're like, oh no, I should have bought at 60. So if you watched the last live stream, I've kind of laid out sort of like, what I think is the broad pattern of Bitcoin, which is that it travels in this incredibly wide range, which is so wide that you want to dismiss it. And we are at the end of the period when it was going to travel between 10 and 100,000. Now you'd be like, Paul, we haven't seen 100,000. Yep. I never said it's going guaranteed to get to 100,000, but travels in this range of 10 to 100,000. And that was the last cycle. And now we are on the precipice, on the edge, on the verge of crossing into the period when it starts to be where it will travel between 100,000 and 1 million. It can go slightly under, it can go slightly over 1 million, but at the low, it will definitely be something under a million. And so go with me and assume that this makes it to, I don't know, anyone can guess a number. I mean, all of the work that I have done in the last several years says, I'll say very high likelihood, high confidence that we get to $1 million. And this is from having studied the Bitcoin price patterns, pretty much going back to everything to 2010, which is like the last place where we really have good records. We don't really have great records of Bitcoin trading in 2009. The best that I've found really goes back to 2010. And what you see is this consistent pattern where it trades between, these exponent numbers, right? Between 1 and 10, 10 and 100, 100 and 1,000, 1,000 and 10,000, 10,000 and 100,000, which is like where we are now. And we're about to jump to the 100,000 to 1 million. I've defined these as epochs, EPOCH. And it's going to shock people because we've never really had something that is mathematically driven where the supply is mathematically defined. It's finite. We have never had a finite asset in human history. I can't think of another one. I suppose on some level, the amount of land on Earth is finite. But gold is infinite. I mean, its supply increases by 2 to 3% every year, and that's just on Earth. If you believe the gold mining folks from that like want to talk about meteorites and all that, there's even more gold out there in the world, but I can't think of another. I mean, diamonds. I mean, yeah, you can find more diamonds. I mean, they get more expensive, but there's more supply that's available. But Bitcoin, and people say, well, Paul, this is man-made. Yeah, that's all true. But I mean, it's still human beings. We are driven by scarcity. As I like to say, not everything that is scarce is valuable, but everything that is valuable is scarce. So scarcity is the basis of all kinds of value, right? I mean, how many Apple, computer companies, Apple companies are there in the world? Well, there's only one, so it's very valuable. How many Microsofts are there? There's only one, so it's valuable, right? So there's definitely, you can, at this point in 2024, I think that the folks, I mean, and that includes people like Warren Buffett, who says, well, Bitcoin has no intrinsic value, etc. But I mean, what's the intrinsic value of a painting? What's the intrinsic value of a rare coin? What's the intrinsic value of, I mean, of so many things today that have multiple trillion dollars worth of value? So, I mean, yes, I mean, I accept that, that Warren Buffett is a very, very, very smart guy and obviously an incredibly successful investor. Still, it doesn't mean that he has to be right about everything, right? I mean, Bitcoin has value partly because we have gone and stored it, we have assigned it, and we recognize it, and it has become a global brand, a global store of value. And that's sort of known, but the mathematical element to this, which is driven by its finiteness, this is incredibly underestimated. People dismiss it. There are folks out there, and I'm just going to put this tweet up by two of the people that sort of are onto this and truthfully have sort of like put me onto this. Um, One of these guys, and I recommend you follow them, his name is Plan B. And he was the very first one to really spot the sort of like the mathematical properties of Bitcoin and put it out there. And now this this tweet is just, you know, another element, to sort of like reconcile between the mathematical side of Bitcoin and then there's the human side, right? The mathematical side of Bitcoin is all like 21 million coins. Supply gets halved every 210,000 blocks, approximately every 4 years. Then there's the human side. The human side is what drives the price gains, right? So we know that we are all psychologically price driven. Nothing that I'm going to telling you today is going to excite that many of you. Why? Well, because there's no price pump. You're like, Paul, it's been at 60 for like 6 months. And, like you said, the last high was in March. And then the last high prior to that was all the way back in 2021. What's the big deal? But I can tell you that if I was making this presentation, it was at 90, 95, 100, I'd be like, Paul, it's going to 200, it's going to 300. We'd be stoked, right? So this really kind of like, demonstrates to you how we'll behave, and we're looking out in the future when the price pump is on, when the highs are coming daily, weekly, monthly, when they're coming. Well, as a Plan B shows, his weekly following just jumped when, of course, you can see the peak, right? Which is the peak, like right about, somewhere, in the middle of 2021. So I have modeled it out and I've come to more or less similar conclusions as what he has come to, which is that the peak is going to be somewhere in the $1 million territory. I call it the million-ish something. Maybe it's a little bit under. It could be higher. It could be lower. But it's going to be somewhere in that territory, and it's certainly going to be over 100,000. And last week I presented this as well, which is a kind of like, this is the mathematical side of Bitcoin, which sort of like gets intertwined, if you will, with the human side of desire for Bitcoin, which is driven by what? Well, I've mentioned price, but what drives that even underneath it? There are definitely some elements of the of our financial system as it currently exists, which is that obviously, if there is loose money in the financial system, more money is going to go into other places. It might be the stock market, but certainly when the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates, and they're having a meeting today and tomorrow, and there will be a decision to either cut interest rates by 0.25%, 0.5%, that will loosen up money in the existing financial system, which will then go to be like, hey, well, where can I get a better return than where I currently am at, especially if you're in cash. Cash is currently paying over 5%. Once the Federal Reserve cuts, cash will start to like return less. And last week I presented my proxy for, which I can show you, for the, I should use, for what the Federal Reserve is going to do. This is the 3-month US Treasury yield. And from long experience of tracking this yield anticipates the Fed by anywhere between 3 to 6 months. And you will see this if I extend this out. This is a 5-year weekly chart. And if you go and look at it, you'll see that At the end of 2022, before the Fed started to raise, it started to go up. In March, by the time the Fed started to increase in March, they had already moved interest rates to almost 0.5%. That's the 90-day T-bill yield. And then you can see it just continued to go up, anticipating that the Fed was going to continue to lift interest rates. And then you'll see more recently, towards the right side of the chart, it's as they call in chartland, rolling over. I mean, this thing has gone. I mean, we've gone from 5.3%, which is on the left side, covered by some of the text, to about 4.6. So the markets are telling you that the Federal Reserve by December, or at the latest by March of next year, is going to cut by at least 0.5%. So one of the things that the human side of what drives Bitcoin price is hugely in favor, which is that there is going to be more money searching for higher returns, searching for greater scarcity, searching for higher rewards, that is coming right as we are about to hit really the best part of this sort of like quadrant. And what these quadrants really show is that Bitcoin goes through a cycle, and the biggest gains really come in this in this quadrant here, where you'll see it says, make this a bit bigger. In the fourth quadrant here, in the first quadrant here to the right, where it's the years 2017, 2021, and 2025. So we are ending this third quadrant here, where you can see years 2012, 2016, 2020, 2024, and in the future, 2028. And we're in the last part of this. And we're about to enter really the period where the biggest gains tend to come. And how do we know this? Well, I mean, from studying the price patterns. And how do we know that this is going to be true? Or let me put some element of uncertainty and likely to be true. That's from studying price patterns and from the fact that we've never had a mathematically finite asset that has been so desired that we have assigned value to in human history, right? So you can accept it, you can not accept it. That's fine. Like I say in my disclaimer, which is that this is not financial investment advice. The YouTube live stream is for free. And even our subscriptions, ultimately, I tell people at the beginning of every update or somewhere in every update, not financial investment advice. It's your money. It's your responsibility. But I can tell you, having studied this, having researched this, having thought about it, having looked at it again and again, I think this is real. I think you'll see this in 2025. The thing is that if you wait until 2025, Bitcoin price, obviously, if I'm right, is going to be significantly higher, and then you'll wish you were in. Now, one person who is not waiting is a man named Michael Saylor, and he is I think he's the chairman of Microstrategy. I think at the time he started this, he was the CEO and maybe chairman. And MicroStrategy has a total of 244,800 Bitcoin acquired for $9.5 billion at $38,585 per Bitcoin. Yeah, that's a lot of Bitcoin. That's a lot of Bitcoin. Remember, there's only going to be 21 million. So, I mean, 10% would be 2.1 million, not anywhere near that. 1% would be 210,000. So they're past that. And he's acquiring more. I told you that when I put MicroStrategy into the portfolio at Banyan Hill and even really at ATG Digital, Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy's um, like setup and structure was not like 100% clear. But today it is. Like he has now built a machine to suck money out of one particular part of the bond market. It is the convertible bond market. He takes money that they give him voluntarily, and then he borrows in this convertible bond market, and then he buys Bitcoin. And the convertible part means that he never has to pay the money back in cash because these bonds convert into stock. And to the extent that he's right, and I think he's right, MicroStrategy stock is going to keep going up. And as it goes up, they will just convert these bonds into stock. And then he'll borrow more, buy more Bitcoin. Bitcoin goes up, takes MicroStrategy stock up with it. That pays off the debt. He borrows some more. And you can see how so far, we can see what thus far he's done. This is the MicroStrategy balance sheet. They're with that last press release that I just previously put up, they're going to pay off that June 2028 bond, which is the earliest one I think that they did prior to them hitting upon this washing machine, like the cycle of like using the convertible bond market to raise cash, buying Bitcoin. Bitcoin goes up, MicroStrategy goes up. They pay off their debt by issuing stock. They borrow more. They buy more Bitcoin. And you can see that they're going to pay off this June 2028 $500 million, which was issued a long time ago, which has the highest interest rate, and they're going to issue like this $700-800 million worth of how much was it? It was $700 million worth of new convertible bonds. Without 500 will go to pay off this debt, and then they're going to have another couple hundred million that they're going to go buy even more Bitcoin. So you've got someone that is making a bet based on what I laid out, which is that I don't know Michael Saylor, but I have to believe that he has spent even more time, understands everything that I have laid out for you about Bitcoin, its mathematical properties, has thought about the human element, has thought about the monetary and financial element, has taken all of that and has found a way to extract money from people who willingly are giving him money because they want exposure to Bitcoin. They can't, for whatever reason, get it through either the native Bitcoin crypto coin or through the ETF. And they're like, oh, you can give us access in this way. We will give you money. You give us access in this way, and we'll continue to do it. And so MicroStrategy is building this Noah's Ark of Bitcoin. There is no plan to sell Bitcoin. I think in the original conception, the idea was that as Bitcoin went up, they would need to sell some and they'd pay the debt off. But using the new strategy, there is no selling. There is no selling. There is just a constant cycle where money is borrowed from the convertible debt market, buys Bitcoin. They hold the Bitcoin through the cycle where it goes above the purchase price. That drives MicroStrategy stock up. That pays off the debt. Now it opens up the ability to borrow even more. And obviously, as MicroStrategy's stock price keeps rising higher and higher, they can borrow more and more and more. This is a cycle that just keeps going and going and going. And while there is more risk because there is debt, and there's almost certainly going to be more volatility in MicroStrategy than Bitcoin itself, I would say most likely MicroStrategy is going to outperform Bitcoin over the long term. It's going to be more volatile, it's going to be more risky, but it is going to outperform Bitcoin. Why? Because they're accumulating this extraordinary amount of Bitcoin. So they are driving at the thing that gives Bitcoin the greatest amount of value, which is what? Well, with each purchase, they're making Bitcoin more scarce for the next buyer. The next person that wants to accumulate, whatever MicroStrategy has, right? The next company, the next government, the next organization that wants to accumulate 250,000 Bitcoin is going to pay a lot more than 9.45 billion for it. I can tell you that. That is guaranteed. That is not yet a fact. Well, obviously at 38,000, they've paid a lot less, but in nobody going to be able to accumulate this much Bitcoin in the way that Michael Saylor has. And so far, no one has been able to replicate his strategy either, which is that no other company is saying, well, we see what Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy are doing and what they're doing with the convertible debt market. We'll do that ourselves. Why? Well, I think because most people either don't understand, don't have the conviction, don't believe, and so they're like, well, I don't believe that, about Bitcoin. I think Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy, for my money, I think they're right. I think MicroStrategy is going to end up being among the most valuable companies on the planet, and it's not going to take 20 years. I think, MicroStrategy right now, let's see, the market capitalization of MicroStrategy is 23, let's say a little under $24 billion. Obviously, if I'm right, and I believe I'm right, and Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy think that they're right, yeah, this is at Bitcoin 100,000. What will MicroStrategy be? Probably, I'm going to say $35 billion company. At 200,000, probably 70, 80 billion. When we hit 1 million, so that's 20 times, a little bit under 20 times where Bitcoin is today. Yeah, this could be a $500 billion company. A $500 billion company. Obviously, things have to go right. Obviously, everything that I laid out has to happen. And you might think, well, I'll just wait. Yeah, well, markets won't wait for you. If the proposition I've laid out is correct, which is the mathematical side of Bitcoin, which is the scarcity is programmed. We've never had an asset like that. The finiteness cannot be manipulated, can't be finagled. With any other asset, if you've studied investment history and market history, when the price goes high enough, someone finds a way to produce more. And that's true for gold. When gold prices go up, the miners get going. They're like, hey, give us money and we will go find more gold. So there's always a way to increase supply. But with Bitcoin, the supply gets cut in half every 210,000 blocks. As the price goes higher, that doesn't change. That doesn't change. And that is what drives the whole sort of like flywheel of scarcity driven value creation. The other one is obviously things that, we're more familiar with, which is obviously human desire, greed, fear, FUD, all these things, interest rate cycles, th- things that happen, but that's there in everything. So these things interact. And then we also know the mathematical property shows that, like, yeah, somewhere after the halving period, somewhere in the but between 4 and 6 months after the halving period, the scarcity driven by the halving starts to take effect. And then in periods when there is far more money than there is Bitcoin, we're going to see enormous rocket rides. And we are at this confluence in 2024 where the Federal Reserve is about to unleash more liquidity into the markets, more liquidity into the economy. And for sure, some of that, maybe even a lot of that, is going to be like, yeah, I think I want that digitally scarce asset called Bitcoin, and people are going to come and bid it higher. We're going to get one part of that, this beginning of how much liquidity they're going to push into markets and into economy starting today and tomorrow, once they announce what they're going to do. And it's unlikely that it's going to stop there because, this is the very long-term chart of the 3-month treasury yield. You can see we have had this move from like where? From near zero. It was negative in 2020 to about 5.35%. And we can just see these moves never end with 1 or 2. So we're probably going to go back. If I were to guess, we'll probably go back to something like, I'll say on the low side, 2.5%, maybe 2.5 to 3.5%. So we've got like another percent and a half where the Federal Reserve. Oh, I didn't show the chart. I didn't show the chart as I was talking about this, but we started at negative 0.24% in 2020 as COVID hit. We hit a peak of 5.35% in, let's say, about October of 2023. And now we're starting to roll down. And past history would suggest that, most roll downs are not small. Sometimes they can be slow, like what we had in 1994. But still, in 1994, we went from 5% all the way down to, about 3.5%. And I expect something like that in this cycle. It's not going to be like this sudden shift down. Instead, we'll get continuous cuts and we'll get to 3.5%. But bottom line, it means there's a lot of money that is going to be coming out of cash, coming out of cash-based accounts, seeking higher returns, seeking greater scarcity, seeking higher rewards. And a lot of that, I think, is going to come for Bitcoin. And then as that happens, of course, people are going to be throwing money at Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy. Be like, here, take our money. We want access to Bitcoin through MicroStrategy. And that's what's going to drive that premium over Bitcoin. Maybe at the peak, MicroStrategy may trade for 2 times its Bitcoin hoard, maybe 3. Depends on how mad we get, how crazy we get. And, if anyone that's followed markets knows that the extremes are always, far more extreme than anyone imagines. And the bottoms, of course, from the extremes are also much further below whatever we think. So we know those extremes are coming. The best way to benefit, is to get in before it happens. Obviously, take some off on the way up. Pay your bills, take care of yourself, because you know that markets have both sides. Markets have both sides. And my view of Bitcoin continues to be this, which is that we're beginning now because we're at the sixth. I mean, the peak prior to halving was in March. The halving was in April. And all of my price studies say that the big moves start somewhere between 4 to 6 months after. We are at the 6-month mark from the high. We're not quite at the 6-month mark from halving, but in other words, the time is getting short for like that period when it's sort of just like in this range and before you see like a big breakout movement. So that's what I think is going to unfold. We see a peak in 2025, probably November, somewhere between, I'd say, October and December of next year. And that goes to somewhere near 1 million. And then 2026 will be ugly. And we will see some decline. And, the decline will be, we've never had a post-peak decline that is less than, I think the last one was 77%. So from the high, whatever it is, we know is going to be something significant. Maybe next time around, it's slightly less. It seems like with each cycle, it's like slightly less. The previous decline was something like 80. I think it was like, 82. So 77. Maybe this time it's 74, maybe 72%. But we know it's coming. And that's equally as defined as the upside. So having thought about it, both in terms of upside, downside, I still think from 60 potential for 1 million, or, I think the downside being, let's say 70, 75%, it's 250,000, 300,000. I think it's still a bet worth making. So that's the subject of the live stream. Let's see what the comments have to say. Rashad, regular live stream viewer, thank you for your first like. Randy, yes, please smash the like and also smash the subscribe button while you're doing it. Thank you, Randy, for attending. Pastor, thanks. Excuse me, a salute. Can't get enough e-chips from NVIDIA, let alone Tesla, Amazon, Microsoft. Lead news. I'm not sure what all that means, truthfully. Anthony Perry asks about the Grayscale mini crypto ETF. So yeah, that's a good question. And let me put up the ETFs and we can compare them. So here are all the ETFs. It's on the right-hand side. You'll see that BlackRock has become the largest Bitcoin ETF with $21.4 billion. And they have a fee of 0.25%. The old Grayscale, which is GBTC, has $13.4 billion left in it. I think it's lost probably more than half of the assets in it. And they still have a fee of 1.5%, which is hilarious compared to, you can see, Fidelity's at 0.25%, 21 shares, which is Cathie Wood and ARK Innovation at 0.21%, Bitwise 0.2%, and then, like you said, Grayscale Mini at 0.15%. This is clearly their way of trying to get people that are selling GBTC to stay within the Grayscale family. And you might be thinking like, well, why don't they just cut the original GBTC down to market rates in terms of the fee? Well, the thing is that they still have $13.4 billion there, and they're collecting 1.5%. And many of those folks are probably folks that bought into GBTC somewhere near the beginning, and it is tax prohibitive for them to sell. And so it is worthwhile for Grayscale as a business, their business strategy to be like, no, better to keep those folks locked in and charge them 1.5%, and give people that are new and or like, try looking to sell the original GBTC a an alternative that is lower. Now they came to the strategy a little late. Probably if they had thought that BlackRock and Fidelity and 21 shares were all going to have such a low expense ratio and fee, they might have chosen this a little bit earlier. But yeah. Let's go to some more comments. Stanley says, Stanley must be a day trader. Took a dive at 11:20 from 139. I mean, this is still a somewhat pretty illiquid stock. I mean, so one of the reasons why, you can see, especially when they announce a bond deal like they did, right? I showed you this earlier. Well, one of the things that people don't know about markets is that when there's a convertible bond, it's hedged by shorting stock. And people are like, what? That don't make any sense. Yeah. So it's just like textbook finance. Like you can pick up a textbook and we'll tell you this. So when you are giving money, you're buying a convertible bond, you hedge against the idea, like, that, well, what if MicroStrategy went bankrupt, whatever. The way you hedge it is by selling and short selling the stock. And now you have a hedge where that will go up because it is ultimately debt. And if that debt were ever go to zero, you have something hedged. So it could be something to do with that. It could be. But my best guess is that it's just regular volatility. People trade MicroStrategy, in line with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is already crazy volatile. And MicroStrategy, I think, has something like 50% more volatility than Bitcoin. So that's what, you're the reason for that. It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not investing for a day. I'm not a day trader. We've been in Bitcoin since 2010, right? In the gold tier, we're up 600%. If it's low, I would be happy to buy more because I didn't lay out a day trading strategy. I laid out a long-term strategy as to how somebody's building a Noah's Ark, and you're giving me second by second, tick by tick movements. These are not relevant to me. If tomorrow it's up 5%, no one's going to say anything. It going up or down during the period of this live stream is neither confirmation or disaffirmation of anything that I've laid out. I mean, MicroStrategy very clearly has made an extraordinary amount of money. You're talking about like second to second volatility, which can be driven by, people shorting it because like what the Fed is going to do. I'm talking about something that can happen over over 2024 and 2025. So yeah. And Pulverizer, who hasn't been on a long time, says up 100% year to date. Thank you for that. Is Coinbase going to come back? Yes. In my opinion, in my judgment, not a guarantee. They are still the dominant crypto exchange. They are the only publicly traded crypto exchange. They are also the only publicly traded and audited crypto exchange. I saw this thing yesterday, which constantly befuddles me. People talking about let me get this up. This reply up. I put up this reply to somebody that wrote this about Bitcoin, and it kind of like I'm very active on Twitter, so it takes me a little while to find this. But so somebody put this up on Twitter, right? Said, pro tip, never sell anything on Coinbase. They rip people off that don't know any better with their outrageous fees. Just simply send it from Coinbase to literally any other exchange you trust and sell it there. My response was this: more money has been lost trying to avoid Coinbase fees. I can remember in 2020, 2021, and even parts of 2022, people telling me how I was missing out, how I was stupid, how I was dumb, how I was being manipulated because I used Coinbase and I used Robinhood and I use Cash App for my Bitcoin. And like, yeah, so you try to get, all those fake rewards from Celsius, lower fees from Voyager. Yeah, I mean, and you lost pretty much all of your money. And in some cases, if you moved your money out even 6 months prior, you're being sued for clawbacks. So there are benefits, folks, for being with a company that is publicly traded, that has audited financial statements. And many people may not know that when a publicly traded company, when the CEO and CFO sign those audited financial statements, they take the risk of going to prison if they are misrepresented or fraud. That is courtesy of what happened in 2001 and Enron, right? So I think another crypto cycle is inevitable, and with that, volumes are going to surge. Transactions obviously are going to surge. The fees will surge at Coinbase. Uh, their customer base will be enlarged. Now they have a large institutional business. To me, it's inevitable that this will rise again. All right, let me take one. Wolf speed. Yeah, I mean, let's put this one up on a chart. And this has been, as Jim Cramer would say, a house of horrors. This has been brutal. Let me scroll this up. I'll put up a 5-year chart to show you really how brutal this is. Now, this is a great example of a cyclical stock. Most people, like, somebody was talking about NVIDIA earlier. Yeah, I mean, most people are thinking about NVIDIA as a growth stock. I do not see NVIDIA as a growth stock. NVIDIA is eventually going to do this. People can hate me for it. You can troll me for it. I've been around markets long enough to know the difference between a cyclical stock and a growth stock. And Wolfspeed is a chip company that makes chips for EVs. And at 143, like, in hindsight, that was obviously the peak of the last EV cycle. And I would say at 7, like almost 90% down, this is pretty much the bottom. That's my opinion. That's my view. This is like, from here, certainly in the United States, we're still in the early stages of the EV transition. I think we're at something like between 6 and 7% of all new cars being sold are EVs. All the data, all the research, all the information suggests that, we're about to go through a huge S-curve shift of adoption, where we're going to get to 30% or so in the next 5 to 7 years. Well, while 140 looks very high and impossible today, in the next cycle, as hard as it to believe, it'll go past 140. That's the horror show and magic of cyclical stocks. I mean, they can go way higher than you ever imagine. And then when the cycle drops out, they can go way lower than you can ever imagine. So we put this in somewhere midway through the cycle where we're down a lot. But at this point, there's no point from my perspective to selling. I mean, obviously, to take a tax loss, you could. But the EV, like, within the larger sort of like thought process of like the EV transition, it's still early. It's still early. There are not that many companies that specialize completely on EVs. And so in the next run, yeah, I mean, anyone that's chasing EV growth, there's not that many stocks that you can really pursue. Tesla is obviously one, but Wolfspeed, in my opinion, my judgment's the other. So we're continuing to hold it. I mean, we own this. Where do we own this? Do we own this in silver or in gold? Wolfspeed, where are you? Where are you? Yeah, we own Mobileye in silver and we own Wolfspeed in gold. Yeah, so I mean, we still own it. We're going to keep owning it for some time to come. Hey, Paul, is there a risk of a market crash after the Fed rate cut when they consider bad news is bad news for the economy? Well, rate cuts are always bad news for the economy. I mean, there's no rate cut where, I mean, if GDP was plus 4%, there's simply no basis to cut. There would be no reason to cut. The only reason to cut is because on some level there is something going on in the economy. And what we are clearly seeing in some elements of manufacturing, we're seeing it obviously in some elements in the services business, is a slowdown in hiring. There are obviously real estate prices are weakening in places where there is too much supply, and existing home sales are down. So there's definitely very selective weakening in various parts of what I'll call the legacy economy. But equally, there's many parts of the economy that are still growing and growing very solidly. It's this bifurcated world where the parts of the economy that were most affected by interest rates, those parts have definitely weakened and are showing signs of weakening. Then there are also the parts of the economy that are over hiring, like some of the services businesses, where people are laying off, people are getting laid off, and those parts are weakening. And then we've got any number of companies as well, particularly on the digital side, on the innovation side, that are doing well. So there's, I mean, is there a risk of a market crash? There's always a risk of a market crash, but from the way I look at it, generally market crashes happen because there's too much leverage in the system. That means that there is someone that simply cannot meet a margin call. In 2007 and 2008, the folks that couldn't meet with were Lehman, Goldman, Morgan, etc. They couldn't meet their margin calls. In other words, they had borrowed so much money, and when it was time to pay it back, they're like, "Oh, we don't have any." So the government then, Big Daddy had to come and give it to them. In the current period, we don't have that kind of leverage. And the reason we don't have that is that the Federal Reserve has kept interest rates near zero for 16 years. And while 5% is high relative to zero, 5% is not high on a historic level. 3% or wherever we're going to, in the next 12, 18, 24 months is still in the low-ish category. So liquidity is still there. And then, of course, there's the spending by the federal government. We have 36 trillion in debt. I mean, we are overspending, over taxes by, I don't know, $500 billion. So there's an extraordinary amount of liquidity and cash in the markets. It's generally quite hard to get like a legitimate, like 2008 style, like crisis crash when there's that much liquidity in the market. What do I think about Intel? Yeah, personally, I am not interested in Intel. As to me, as the sector to me is something that is past its cyclical top, which is semiconductors. Second, on a business basis, I mean, this is a company that is behind the curve, has made a lot of fundamental mistakes. If you read books on history, I mean, Intel's peak was sadly like 20 years ago. So it never pays to buy technology and growth for value. You always want to buy technology and growth for the benefit that the innovation provides. And you can see it in the growth that's there. As like Jim Cramer would say, you don't want to buy broken companies. You want to buy broken stocks. So Pulveris said, I was working and laid off for a bit for going back. I still catch the replay. We'll always appreciate your support. GXO and let's see here, GXO, which is, do we own GXO still? I have to just check. I think we used to own it in, I think GXO we own in the GBC 100, which is our ETF, but we don't have this. Let me put this up. I'm happy to give you my view, what it's worth. That's a 5-year chart of GXO. We own it, I believe, in the GBC 100, which is our like index of growth and innovation stocks at ATG Digital. My general view on this and why we've had this is that we've got another digital transition happening. We've got reshoring going on. In other words, bringing back production from China. Then we have the redistribution of how goods are being bought. More and more of our shopping is being done online, which means it changes how you deliver the goods. Like there's more like last mile delivery logistics that's required. We are going to have to redo all of this. And then as autonomy comes and we have self-driving trucks and all these things, that's going to change everything. And so companies like GXO, in my opinion, they're going to see an extraordinary amount of business, looking forward. Roku, this is a stock that I said earlier, this is a broken stock, but not a broken company. This is a company that has been smashed to its current levels as much because of the sort of like the macro setup of markets where people want short duration investments and have been short long duration investments. They essentially have a monopoly on like all digital video entering the home. I think in hindsight, people are going to look at like any of these prices all the way up to 100 and think like this was crazy cheap. That's my view. Why is MicroStrategy when Bitcoin is going up? Well, I told you earlier that they're doing a deal for 700 million. And one of the things that when you float convertible debt, my guess is that people are trying to rush and get that deal done. And so the way they hedge convertible debt is to short MicroStrategy stock down. And that's probably one reason for it. I'm obviously not looking at the market while I'm doing the live stream, so I don't know for sure. But that would be my best guess. Alternately, it just could be somebody. I don't know. Maybe somebody issued a short report. I know there is some hedge fund manager that has been short for a while. Maybe somebody's done that, and it could be any number of things. But these are all, again, people are very focused on day-to-day movements, but the big gains, folks, are not made in a day. They're not made in a week. They're not made in a month. They come over, at minimum, like 6, 12, 18 months, right? If you want to make 300, 500, 700, 1,000%, you're going to have to sit through some volatility. A single day's, movements is not going to, do much. stock. Let's try this one more time. I have to say the ticker's not bringing up. Yeah, Hang. Yeah, this is a Chinese company that provides eVTOL taxi services. I've been meaning to go to China, and go to Shanghai and go to Beijing, because from what people tell me, they got robo taxis running around. They got eVTOL taxis that you can take. It's hard to really make a judgment about sort of like stocks like this, or even similar stocks like Joby Aviation, Archer Aviation, Lilium, because while we can have a price bump related to, hey, they got licensing, hey, they made a deal with United, hey, they made a, like, we know that any long-term bull market in any stock has to be driven by the business. In other words, the greatest number of investors The investors with the largest amounts of money buy stocks because they represent businesses. And those businesses, they want them to be valuable, they want them to be growing, and those two things, make them scarce. At this point, I don't know of any like fast growing eVTOL taxi network anywhere in the world. I would love to go to China, truthfully, and check this out. But I can't say I have an opinion. I'm following all of these eVTOL stocks because obviously I can see the business case for it. I can see them like wiping out regional airlines. I can see them, wiping out Amtrak. I can see them wiping out Greyhound and bus services. Because who wouldn't just like want to I don't know, go 5 minutes away from where you are, get into an eVTOL taxi, and it can take you 300 miles. Like I like to go to Washington D.C. from time to time to attend concerts and things like that. It used to be 4 hours, but it takes over 6 hours, and the last 30, 40 miles can take an hour to an hour and a half. Yeah, I would love to jump into an eVTOL and just get there, but it's not here yet. And until somebody can lay out a business model for how this is going to work, you can get price pumps, but there will be no sustainable bull market. That's my view. We're getting tick by tick updates from folks on MicroStrategy. It's going to be dependent on ultimately. Remember, the good way to think about it is like, well, it's got MicroStrategy has about 50% more volatility than Bitcoin. Bitcoin has something like 50 to 75% volatility. So you lop on another 50% on top of that. So it really depends on where Bitcoin goes and the path by which it takes to get there. Will all the gains come? Will we have once the Fed cuts, will there be a huge move into Bitcoin? If that is, it will take MicroStrategy with it. So I would say my base case for Bitcoin is that we hit a peak of somewhere near 1 million, and you take a 75% cut from there, you get to 250. So from here, 50, three to four times. So the next bottom, in MicroStrategy is going to be somewhere like associated with Bitcoin. So at the top, we could go, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 times from here. I know it sounds insane, but look, folks, there's nobody else that is like that has this kind of like Noah's Ark of Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin at 1 million. How many people want MicroStrategy? Well, pretty much everybody that can't own crypto, right? I can't own the Bitcoin. They're like, well, but you get into MicroStrategy. So I'll get bid up some huge premium because it's scarce. There's no other MicroStrategies in the world, right? Just remember, when GBTC was the only way by which you could get access through a brokerage account in 2016 and 2017, it traded 100% premium, to Bitcoin. Right. So you could have something similar happen with MicroStrategy. How does World War III breaking out? I don't see World War III breaking out any place. I did see the thing today about how the Israeli Secret Service, Mossad, has targeted Hamas using pagers, which is wild. But I don't see World War III breaking out yet. If this is an actual question, as a stock picker, investor, etc., I've thought about all of this, and you can go. We obviously have examples. We have World War I, we have World War II, we have the two Gulf Wars, we have the global war on terror. And generally speaking, what happens is that wars tend to unleash. Wars at first cause panic, and everybody wants cash. Everything will crash, and then the government, the Federal Reserve, floods the markets with liquidity, and then you get like a post-COVID rebound, which is that liquidity goes in the markets, and and then all the things that benefit from whatever the pattern, structure, shape of the war is, they just rocket up and they surge higher. That's been the pattern pretty much for every war. You can think that, but go back and look. Go back and look from the original cycle from 2009. You can just see this exponential effect where the range, essentially over a 7-year period, jumps an exponent. And so, like at the peak, everyone thinks like they're incredibly rich. And then, because I mean, people tend to buy at highs, right? I mean, that's when the feeling's good. You're overwhelmed, like by like this, like, oh my God, I should have gotten in. So, I mean, at $1 million, people are going to come in and, everyone's going to want to own Bitcoin. Everyone's going to want to own MicroStrategy. It'll trade some crazy premium. The best comparator, in my opinion, to the current cycle really, let me see, can I get a chart up of, let me see here. I put these charts together. Let me see. This is the 2016 sort of like, this is the equivalent of the year that we are in. This is before the huge price pump that came in 2017 that took Bitcoin to almost 20,000, which was almost 100% over what I'll call the mathematical value of Bitcoin for that cycle. We're not really like anywhere. I mean, no, I mean, we're just getting going. We're just getting going. And if I were to, go one, that's not it. This is 2024. This is where we currently are. And we're just getting going on really that last quadrant where we're first going to get back to the old high, which is yellow. The blue is halving. And when the 2025 chart arrives, if I'm correct, it'll look something like 2017, which looks like this. We've forgotten like how incredible that 2017 move was like. I mean, you see that? I mean, like, can't really, this is not great. Let me put this up for just 2017. That was 2017. I mean, we took out 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, all the way up to 20. That happened in a year. Right. We went from 1 to 20,000 in a year. Right. People think that's unthinkable, but this has happened before at smaller increments. The reason it seems even more unthinkable today is that we're starting to approach like these mathematically like crazy levels like $1 million. But just think, like, compared to 2017, how much fiat USD has been issued by the Federal Reserve, how much money there is in the system. Is it 10x more? Is it 100x more? I mean, there's obviously the amount of money that's been pushed in. There is then the desire to own Bitcoin. The demand is greater. So I think it's completely possible. I mean, but like I said, it's obviously my view of the world. But bottom line, yeah, very exciting times coming for Bitcoin, for MicroStrategy. It's sort of like I don't know, it's leveraged twin with its Noah's Ark strategy. Bigger returns, more risk, higher volatility. You can choose. MicroStrategy is in our gold tier portfolio, but it's not the only way. Another leveraged way of getting to Bitcoin is the miners. They're also on like the cycle. that's quite clear, becoming quite established. Um, that's another way to play it. And then, of course, there are all the other coins that like tend to get this like halo effect as Bitcoin gets to new peaks and money floods the crypto system. We are, of course, at ATG Digital primed, locked, and loaded for all of this. If you're looking for, general guidance, what to buy, ideas, check us out. atgdigital.media. With no more questions, thank you all for attending this live stream. I'll see you next week. This is Paul saying bye.